love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now, it is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. Yay.
Well, yeah, welcome to the November meeting of the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign. Very excited to see everyone here, first and foremost. That was powerful that, we're in this moment in time, and we shall learn what it means to live in love together, as a state, as a nation, as a Poor People's Campaign. So I'm very excited to just see everyone's faces, and see the numbers that I can't see faces on. Those are some nice, lovely digits there. And so noticing and recognizing those spaces as well from those who are calling from phone. Thanks for coming.
I'm going to pause you so that I can interpret.
Oh, my fault. Go ahead.
Please. No, all good, all good. Bienvenido a la reunión de noviembre de la bienvenidas y bienvenidos a todos a la reunión estatal de noviembre de la campaña de la gente pobre. Estamos muy contentos de tenerlos a todos aquí y como dijo la canción, vamos a aprender a vivir y amar todos juntos y estamos muy felices de ver a todas las caras y también las personas que no podemos ver sus caras. Estamos muy felices de tenerles aquí.
So yeah, our meeting is bilingual in Spanish and in English. And I want to introduce our interpreters, Leo and Charito. Please come off mute and say hello to us.
Nuestra reunión es en español e inglés. Quiero presentar a nuestros intérpretes, Leo y Charito. Por favor, preséntense.
Hola a todos. Hello, everyone. I'm Leo and I'm in DC. Hola a todos. Soy Leo y estoy aquí en DC.
Hola a todos, soy Charito y estoy en el Ecuador, en la mitad del mundo, con todo amor para todos ustedes. Hi, I am Charito and I am in Ecuador with all my love for all of you.
Thank you. I'm very appreciative of your guys' time given to us. Now we will make our interpretation announcement, first in English, then in Spanish. And so listen carefully because there's instructions that everyone will have to follow.
Ahora haremos nuestro anuncio de interpretación, primero en inglés y luego en español. Por favor, presten atención porque habrán instrucciones para todos, para todos.
So the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign understands the strategic importance of basically making space for one another when it's possible. And so we are organizing across all lines of differences and divisions, including language. To that end, we have interpretation in Spanish and in English. And so we ask that all participants speaking slowly will speak slowly and clearly. Right after this announcement, we will activate the Zoom interpretation feature. Part of our meetings will be in English and other parts in Spanish. So everyone, please make sure to follow these instructions. If you are using Zoom from your computer, you will see a globe icon at the bottom of your screen. Click on the globe and select your preferred language. If you are using Zoom from your phone, click on the 3 little dots where it says more, and then you'll choose language interpretation and select your preferred language. If you have any problems doing this, please comment in the chat so that one of our members can assist you. Thank you.
La campaña de la gente pobre de Wisconsin entiende la importancia estratégica y tiene la firme determinación de crear un espacio multilingüe y de unirnos a través del lenguaje. Con esta finalidad tenemos interpretación en español e inglés. Les pedimos a todos los participantes que hablen lentamente de forma clara. Al terminar este anuncio, activaremos la función de interpretación de Zoom. Y si usted está usando Zoom en su computadora, podrá ver un icono de un mundo en la parte de abajo de su pantalla. Haga clic en el mundo y seleccione el lenguaje de su preferencia. Si está usando Zoom desde su teléfono, haga clic en los 3 puntitos donde dice More o más. Seleccione Language Interpretation o interpretación de idiomas y luego su lenguaje. Si tiene algún problema, ponga un comentario en el chat y uno de nuestros miembros le ayudará. Muchas gracias. Y ahora vamos a activar interpretation. And now we're going to activate the interpretation. So go ahead and follow those instructions. And we're going to take 1 moment to test. Charito, ¿puede decir algo en la línea de español, por favor? Tiene su micrófono apagado. Charito, están en mute todavía en el Zoom. Sí. Sí. Okay, and could Natalia, could you say something in the main room just so I can make sure that
In English? In English, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Leo, can you say something en español, por favor? Okay, we are good to go, everybody. And Charito, usted va a empezar la interpretación.
Awesome sauce. So, hey, thank you to our interpreters and tech team, and a special welcome to anyone who is new to the Poor People's Campaign. If this is your first time meeting with us, we are glad you are here, and we are eager to get to know you and learn what brought you to the campaign. My name is Femi. I'm a member of our coordinating committee, and I'll be co-emceeing the meeting for tonight, along with my friend and another leader of the Poor People's Campaign named Moses. And the focus of tonight's meeting will be on the National Union of the Homeless and the upcoming Winter Offensive organizing drive that we're seeking to participate in. First, we will split into groups where basically new folks will go to another breakout room to learn more about the Poor People's Campaign. Those who feel they have a grasp and basically strong foundation of the Poor People's Campaign will stay here, where Dr. Colleen Wessell-McCoy will be teaching a session on the history and lessons of Resurrection City. And finally, we will be basically coming back together to learn more about the National Union of the Homeless and also the 2021 Winter Offensive. Before we get started, we want to ask everyone to use the naming feature to help basically us identify you. If this is your first PPC statewide meeting, please indicate that. by adding an asterisk to your name. We are going to be having an orientation for new folks later on during this meeting, and so that asterisk will just help us out in identifying those who need to be shifting on to a different separate breakout room. So please take a minute now to add an asterisk to your name by going to participants, clicking on your name, and right-click for Windows, and then you'll see select rename, and then you'll just type in what you need to type in, basically that asterisk, and it'll allow you to save it. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Reverend Ari with basically an invocation and a land recognition as we begin.
Thank you, Femi. As Femi said, we're going to begin today's meeting with a brief invocation. You can take this time to pray, to meditate, to reflect, or simply to ground yourself. We start off by acknowledging that we are on land of broken promises and forced removal of people. We acknowledge that genocide happened and in many ways is still happening. Indigenous people are not relics of the past. They are here, still offering us their talents and stories. This is their land in past, present, and future. So we want to respectfully acknowledge the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, Ho-Chunk Nation, Lake Court Orlais Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, Lac du Flambeau Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, Menominee Tribe of Wisconsin, Oneida Nation, Forest County Potawatomi, Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, St. Croix, Chippewa, Sokogan, Chippewa, Mole Lake, and Stockbridge, Munsee, in addition to other non-federally recognized tribes. They have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Today, we gather in the spaces that we are creating sacred with the work that we are undertaking to stand for what is right and speak out against what is wrong, to challenge those systems that have become, perhaps in their very creation, institutions that do not lift up, but rather harm the poor and low-income individuals of Wisconsin, to claim our right as people of conscience, to stand for what is right, and to frame the struggle that we are devoted to in this time and place. I call on you at this time to look in one another's eyes, recognize the beautifully created humanity that is within each person here. That though we are varied, it is through such moral fusion that we will win the fight for dignity and survival. Today, we renew our dedication to each other that we might achieve the first steps of success in achieving what is needed for all people. Given that Saturday is Transgender Remembrance Day, we also remember the over 30 people who have been killed by hate-based violence towards trans people this year alone. I invite you to join me in prayer or quiet meditation. Great Spirit, you are the parent to us all. You who have called us each by name and brought us to this place. You who blessed the prophet Isaiah with the words to proclaim the Jubilee year. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. They have sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release of the prisoner, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. I thank the divine who is known in so many different ways and by many different names for bringing us together, a beautifully varied people together. I ask that we might be strengthened, that love and unity might conquer hatred and fear. I ask that the rainbow of races might not live in fear of what authorities may do to them. I ask that LGBTQIA2 folk may be treated fairly and with love. I ask that those with uteruses may no longer be oppressed in this state or any other state. I ask that authorities might listen to our cries for justice, which come from the deep lamentation of a hurt and bleeding people. For someone is hurting our siblings, and it has gone on for far too long. We pray that our grief and mourning may be replaced with joy and celebration. That the Holy One uses our hands and feet to rebuild our institutions that have been defiled by white supremacists. We ask that we are given strength to stand in righteousness and truth in this age, for you have written righteousness and hope upon our hearts. We ask that all those who are here, whether they support us or not, may live in safety and security, and that peace may reign. Most of all, may that single word, which is our state motto, be made true. Forward. Forward into a future where we have a government that works for us, not against us. Forward into a future where all can vote. Forward into a future where everyone can make a decent wage. All this we pray to the one of many names. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for Bernari. So hi everyone. My name is Moses, and as Femi said, I will be co-chairing this meeting, and I am a tri-chair of the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign. And so what we're going to do now is we are going to split into 2 breakout rooms. And the way that this is going to work is that folks who feel that they have a firm grasp on the foundations of the Poor People's Campaign will stay in this room. And Dr. Colleen Wessell-McCoy is going to talk a little bit more about Resurrection City and the original 1968 Poor People's Campaign. And then for anyone that is new, we will have an orientation that will be in a separate breakout room. And so Nate, you can go ahead and open those breakout rooms, and we will start splitting that up, and I will try and speak louder.
Just a quick clarification because I forgot something. So the breakouts are for the stars or the non-stars?
Breakout rooms are for the stars, and that's going to be people who are going to the orientation.
And is it one breakout room or is it 2 by 2? I forgot to ask that before. I'm sorry.
So it'll be one breakout room, and then we'll keep the main room open for the political education.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Nate. Thank you folks so much for your patience. We'll be back here in the main room in about 20 minutes for the rest of our meeting.
Okay, I think all the stars have been moved to the other room. So We only
Okay,
have,
great.
I think we're good.
Great, thank you so much, Nate. And I think I will pass it over to Dr. Colleen Wessell-McCoy, who is going to talk to us a little bit more tonight about Resurrection City. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Dr. Colleen.
Hey, it's really good to be here with you. I'm calling in from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm really excited for the work.
Sorry, pause for 1 sec. Charito, ya no tiene que interpretar, ya va a comer a Leo. Gracias. Okay, thank you. Just quick interpretation. We're good.
Thanks. Thank you for interpreting. I'm calling from Arizona, and I'm really excited about being here with y'all and actually learning from you as well, and how y'all are organizing the Poor People's Campaign in Wisconsin. I'm going to mostly share some images, and anybody who's on the phone or can't see the images, I'm going to describe them as well, so that everybody can know a little bit what we're talking about. Do you see an image of a map with little lines across it? Great. If it gets blocked at any point, please let me know. These are the caravans that in 1968, thousands of people traveled across the country from all parts of the country to come to Washington, D.C. for the Poor People's Campaign. So 1968, each little dot is a city, and there were actually more of them, but they would stop along the way and pick up more people. And so the caravans would grow as they traveled across the United States and descended in Washington, D.C. And when they arrived, they built, the first people to arrive were the ones who built it, but they built an encampment, a tent city encampment, and they called it Resurrection City. And so this is an image. If you see on the right side, there is the Lincoln Memorial, and below that is the reflecting pool. So if you remember, like the big march on Washington, everyone gathered, the speakers stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and everyone, the thousands, hundreds of thousands of people gathered around the reflecting pool, and this is the spot where that happened. And so in this picture, if you look, there's a row of trees, and then to the left of the reflecting pool, that's the encampment, and that's Resurrection City. And at the height, there were 3,000 people could live there at one time. And they occupied that federal land, the national park, for 40 days. And so people would come and go, people would come and stay for a while and then go home, and new people would come. And over the course of the 40 days, 6,000 people registered to live in Resurrection City. And this was a vision of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and others that were organizing, and they said, let's go to Washington, D.C. and make clear that there are 40 million poor people in the United States. So at the time, they were in the way that the Poor People's Campaign today talks about the 140 million. In 1968, the population of the United States was smaller, but that they said there were 40 million poor people in the United States, but that Washington was acting as if those people didn't exist and pretending that or sort of treating only the small, treating poverty in a small way and not dealing with it in its full extent. And so there's more to say about that, but today I actually we wanted to look at what happened in Resurrection City and how that was a tactic of the Poor People's Campaign. So I'm going to show more images of how they used this tactic in 1968. So here's a ground level view facing the other direction. So you see in the back of this image is the Washington Monument. And so Resurrection City ran alongside the reflecting pool from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument. And they actually laid plumbing and electricity, and they built all the kinds of utilities, bath, latrines, and a dining hall where 3 meals a day were served. And then they built tents, these tents, each out of plywood. And so each of these tents would hold 6 people. There would be 6 cots in each of these tents. And so here's another view of the outside of some of these tents. They were a combination of plywood and fabric and plastic. So here's a family outside their tent. Here's more families living in Resurrection City. I thought I had inside the tent, but I don't. So this is the march that started the occupation. Started at the beginning of Resurrection City. It was on Mother's Day, and included a lot of leadership from the National Welfare Rights Organization. I want to acknowledge their role in this. This is an image of the medical tent. So they had dental and medical services provided by volunteer doctors and volunteer nurses. And so there was a medical tent within Resurrection City. There was a bakery in Resurrection City that baked the bread that was then served in the dining hall. And this is one of my favorite images. So many of the tents in Resurrection City would have slogans painted on them. And this one says, bread, free forever, and at the bottom, give us this day. And this is a quotation of the Christian prayer, sometimes called the Lord's Prayer, that says, give us this day our daily bread. And a lot of times that is interpreted as spiritual, that it's talking only about spiritual nourishment. And here it's very much saying, no, that prayer is about bread, and that people need bread, people have the right to bread, and we are going to provide bread. So the encampment not only met people's needs, but became a base of operations for actions across Washington, D.C. So people lived together in Resurrection City, they got medical care, they got food, they had political education in the encampment, but then they used that as a grounding for going out to different parts of the federal government and doing sit-ins and truth commissions and demand deliveries, letter deliveries, all these kinds of things that we do today in the Poor People's Campaign. And they would do it. It was really important that they did it not just by issue. So it's not just that people who were talking about the minimum wage went to the Department of Labor only as the people who were interested in the minimum wage, but they would have a delegation of everyone go to the Department of Labor and talk about wages. And when they wanted to make demands around welfare rights, it wasn't just people who received welfare who would go to that department and make demands, but everybody would go and make those demands. And they would go to the Supreme Court. There was one day when the Supreme Court was ruling on treaty fishing rights in Washington state for a indigenous tribe there whose treaty rights were being violated. And it wasn't just people from Washington state, it wasn't just people from that tradition who went there, but everybody went in solidarity to the Supreme Court and petitioned and actually occupied the outside of the Supreme Court and were actually violently chased away by the police. Here's another example of an occupation. This one's of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and they gave testimony to the secretary there, the secretary of within the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so they would go to these different departments within the government, the national government, and offer testimony. and in a way very similar again to the types of tactics that we use today to petition and make clear. So back in Resurrection City, it's important to say that it rained a lot. So they were there for 42 days, and it rained like 36 of those days. And so it got so flooded and so muddy and so gross that like people's clothes wouldn't dry. And it was, even though it was June, it got like really cold, like when people were wet. And this became a lot of what the media talked about and published. So like the newspapers talked about like how dirty everybody was and like how miserable it was and how poorly everything was going, and that it was just in lots of ways reported to be a failure. And it was actually very hard. Like it was very demoralizing and logistically challenging that it rained. A lot of people went like after there were 3 big downpours in a row, and the population of Resurrection City dropped. A lot of people went home after that. And so it actually was really hard that it rained so much. And at the same time, as that being challenging, there's still a lot to celebrate and lift up and remember and learn from Resurrection City. Here's an image of people gathered around a bonfire. A lot of people described that there was intellectual exchange. So people talked about ideas. They shared the conditions where they were coming from. So people, if you remember the map, that people are coming from all across the country, and people had been organizing around different issues and experiencing the different faces of poverty and racism and war. And so they shared those with each other. They also, folks who were there describe that music and cultural exchange was a really important part of their time together, that they would come from different musical traditions and with different instruments, but figure out how to play together and how to make new music together and listen to each other's music. And that people say that was a really important part of their time together. And then importantly, again, for this coming year, they had a huge march at the end of their time, at the end of their occupation. It was called Solidarity Day, and 50,000 people came to Washington, D.C. So whereas the encampment was, at any given time, as many as 3,000 people, on this day, 50,000 people came to Washington, D.C. And they had a lot, if you can see, here's an image of a bunch of people at an action. And if the font is big enough, you can see that there's unions here. Their signs are like 1199 marching here. And then lots of different religious denominations, so the United Methodist Church, the American Baptists, the Brethren Peace Fellowship. So people coming from all of these different sectors, all contributing to this really big Solidarity Day, and that being really important. And then here's an aerial view of Solidarity Day. So this image is in the foreground is the Lincoln Memorial, and in the background is the Washington Monument with the reflecting pool between it. And then along the right side is Resurrection City, the occupation, and then all the 50,000 people who came for Solidarity Day. The Resurrection City was just a couple days after Solidarity Day was demolished by the police. They offered everybody a bus ticket to anywhere they wanted to go, and so the population was down to about 50 people, and the police cleared all, sort of in knowing that the police were coming in an act of civil disobedience. They were arrested by the police, and Resurrection City was demolished. So Jesse Jackson, who has a really great relationship with the campaign today, had a really strong role in Resurrection City, and he wrote an article in Ebony magazine that year, and with his insights about what can be learned from Resurrection City. And he said that Resurrection City cannot be seen as a mud hole in Washington, but it is rather an idea unleashed in history. And so you can hear in what he's saying that that this idea is not over, that idea has not been demolished, and that there's more to come in this, both the Poor People's Campaign, but also some of the tactics that they used. And so in terms of the idea that's being unleashed in history, so King was assassinated before Resurrection City took place, before anyone stepped off to come to Washington, D.C. King was assassinated. But when he was talking about why we were doing a Poor People's Campaign, why they were calling together a Poor People's Campaign, he said, the only real revolutionary, people say, is a person who has nothing to lose. There are millions of poor people in this country who have little or even nothing to lose. If they can be helped to take action together, they will do so with a freedom and a power that will be a new and unsettling force in our complacent national life. And so this is some of that idea that's an idea unleashed in history, in the words of Jesse Jackson. And the Resurrection City, the idea of Resurrection City was that it was a place where those millions of poor people, here just at first 3,000 of them, but that they can come together and start to build that power, start to take action together. And so Resurrection City was a place where people could come and join together and learn from each other, and by taking action together, start to build that new and unsettling force. So the rest of that quote is that King is saying, beginning in the new year, we'll be recruiting 3,000 of the poorest citizens and do a sustained, massive, direct action movement in Washington. And he calls them the Nonviolent Army and Freedom Church of the Poor. And so this is the vision for the Poor People's Campaign. And Resurrection City, even in the loss of King, Resurrection City started to put that into motion, started to be an encampment that put that into motion. And so then one last quote from Jesse Jackson, he said, "It was in our wallowing together in the mud of Resurrection City that we were allowed to hear, to feel, and to see each other for the first time in our American experience. This vast talk of articulation, of pulling poor people together as a way of amassing economic, political, and labor power was the great vision of King." But there's more to get to talk about, but I hope that some of those images help us think about what's possible, both what happened in 1968, but also about this idea unleashed in history that we are living into in the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival.
Thank you so much, Colleen. I really appreciated that, and that was really powerful. And I think that's really going to tie into some lessons that we're going to be talking about tonight, of what we took away today and what the National Union of the Homeless took away today as well, and in the 1980s. So I want to thank you so much for coming today, and we just really appreciate your time and your wisdom. So thank you so much.
Thanks. It's really good to be with you.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everyone, from your breakout rooms. I hope that your breakout room, that you were able to learn a lot about the Poor People's Campaign. We learned about the Resurrection City here today, but we're also in this next section going to be talking a little bit about these things and tying it all together. And so, as you probably know,
I'm just going to pause you for a moment. I'm sorry to keep interrupting. I'm going to pause this for a moment to get our interpretation set. Charito, ¿está lista para empezar? Okay, perfecto. Gracias. We're good.
Perfect. Thank you. So, as Spencer said at the beginning of the meeting, this meeting is focused on the National Union of the Homeless's Winter Offensive Organizing Drive, which started this last Sunday. And in addition to talking about this Winter Offensive Organizing Drive, we'll also be talking about current conditions here in Wisconsin and also how you can take action. So Nate, would you be able to start sharing the screen? Okay, so awesome. So we're kind of going to be tying both of the political education rooms together in this presentation. And so as part of this piece, we wanted to talk a little bit about the history of the 1968 Poor People's Campaign and the occupation of the National Mall, as well as current conditions here in Wisconsin and across the country, and organizing that's happening around the country and in Wisconsin and how you can get involved. And so, as I said before, my name is Moses, and alongside being a tri-chair with the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign, I'm also a member of the Clergy Council of the National Union of the Homeless with Dr. Colleen and other leaders across the country. And I've been helping to organize our Winter Offensive Organizing Drive for these past few months. And so I'm just really excited to be talking about some of the amazing organizing that we're doing and that we'll keep doing for the next 3 months. You can go to the next slide. So we're going to start a little bit with the history of the 1968 Poor People's Campaign. And I know many of us already have a foundation because either we came in with one tonight or we just, were in a breakout session talking about it. But I think it's important to constantly be grounded in our history. And so I'm actually going to read a couple of quotes and show a couple photos of the original 1968 campaign. So in 1968, Dr. King, in partnership with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and many others, called for a revolution of values in the United States. And so the question, of course, is that I'll slow down. The question, of course, was that what were the conditions in which the Poor People's Campaign was needed to emerge in 1968. So the development of this campaign had a lot of origins, and one of the main ones was that Dr. King and the SCLC noticed that despite seeing gains in civil rights, many Black Americans were still living in poverty and had unequal access to make gains in society. And so you'll read on this slide here a 1968 quote from Dr. King. "Now our struggle is for genuine equality, which means economic equality. For we now know that it isn't enough to integrate lunch counters. What does it profit a man to be able to eat at an integrated lunch counter if he doesn't have enough money to buy a hamburger? What does it profit a man to be able to eat at the swankiest integrated restaurant when he doesn't even earn enough money to take his wife out to dine? What does it profit one to have access to the hotels of our cities and the hotels of our highways when we don't earn enough money to take our family on a vacation? What does it profit one to be able to attend an integrated school when he doesn't earn enough money to buy his children's school clothes?" And go to the next slide. So it's also important to note that around this time, around 22 to 33% of Americans were living what was federally recognized as the poverty line, and people in poverty were becoming more and more stigmatized. The Washington campaign, which is what the Poor People's Campaign was initially called, would be different from past campaigns, not only in its focus on poverty, but in its inclusion of the poor across racial and ethnic lines. While part of this campaign was definitely to influence leaders in Washington, it was also just as important to Dr. King and to other leaders to develop leaders across lines of division to create a mass social movement that could not be ignored. And I want to make it very clear, and we don't talk about this a lot, but this campaign was very controversial for this day. And just before he was assassinated, King was asked whether he was getting away from his Christian roots and moving into what many were calling, quote unquote, radical class politics. But Dr. King replied that the Poor People's Campaign was the most moral movement and exactly what the gospel called us to do. You can go to the next slide. So as you may or may not know, Dr. King was assassinated in April of 1968, right before the Poor People's Campaign launched. And his mentor and one of his closest friends, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, took over the campaign. And on Saturday, May 12th, 1968, Coretta Scott King led a 2-week protest in Washington, D.C. And the next day, Resurrection City was launched. And you can go to the next. So as we talked about here in the main room, Resurrection City was a town in which thousands of poor people set up and lived in for about 6 weeks. The city had its own zip code, a psychiatrist, a university, and a school. Reverend Jesse Jackson served as the mayor, and small excursions were held in which members of Resurrection City would attempt to meet members of Congress. This event was heavily tracked by the FBI, who posed as journalists, and military intelligence wiretapped the city. And basically, the media tried really hard to make Resurrection City look like a failure and really tried to reinforce negative stereotypes of poverty. And you can go to the next slide. And as Dr. Colleen kind of touched on in this main room, it's important that we recognize, though, that this effort and what Resurrection City did, which was bringing together this broad coalition and doing essentially what was a takeover in the heart of our nation's capital, and not letting politicians look away from the current conditions of that time, is so important. From that same Ebony article that Colleen cited, Reverend Jesse Jackson pointed out that the Poor People's Campaign was one of the single greatest challenges ever unleashed on the current system, bringing together such a diverse coalition of people into one space and into one movement. And it's important that we really don't lose sight of that today. So you can go to the next slide. So I wanted to kind of start with this because I wanted to kind of bring forth the question of whether or not our current conditions, especially with the focus on housing tonight, have either changed or gotten better. But I pulled some stats from the Poor People's Campaign Jubilee Policy Platform, and I'm just going to read some of them to you. So there are 5 vacant homes for every homeless person in the country. Before COVID, 8 to 11 million people were homeless or on the brink of homelessness. 30 to 40 million evictions are expected in the coming months. More than 70% of households with disabled members living below the poverty line do not receive federal housing assistance. And here in Wisconsin, about a year ago, in July of 2020, about 458,000 Wisconsin renters were at risk of eviction, which was 27% of households in the state. This statistic is expected to rise. And meanwhile, in the context of all of this, the combined wealth of America's billionaires increased by $845 billion between March 18th and September 18th of 2020. So obviously, not much has actually changed since the origins of this campaign in 1968. And in fact, many can argue that it actually has gotten worse. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to shift a little bit to talk about some organizing, especially around housing and homelessness that's happening nationally in these next few months. And so we're actually going to start this section of this presentation with a clip from a documentary called Takeover, which was released in 1992, that documented the takeover of vacant HUD homes in over the span of a year. And so you can go to the next slide and you can go ahead and play that clip.
This film was shot simultaneously in 8 cities as homeless people took over empty houses on May 1st, 1990.
That's the ticket. We are the National Union of the Homeless, and we're taking HUD houses again today.
One thing I learned tonight, because I didn't learn anything else, homeless. It can be done. You understand? It can be done if people just take the initiative and break it in. You got to forget about it being against the law. I don't care. I'm dying in the streets. I think that should be against the law.
Your neighbor.
So the organization featured in this video was the National Union of the Homeless, which was reestablished in 2018. Born out of movements like the National Poor People's Campaign of 1968, at its peak, the National Union of the Homeless had close to 30,000 members in 25 cities. You can go to the next slide.
This film was shot simultaneously.
So I started this presentation tonight with the background of the original Poor People's Campaign, not only because the NUH drew lessons from the original PPC, but because leaders in the 2018 Poor People's Campaign drew lessons from both the original PPC and the National Union of the Homeless. When I interviewed Reverend Dr. Liz Theo-Harris about her own political development, she told me, the first night I went off to college, I moved to Philadelphia and I met up with the National Union of the Homeless and the National Welfare Rights Union. And I was baptized into a movement led by those who are poor. So really kind of reconstructing the country and the world from the bottom up. So really my whole development has been along those lines. Go to the next slide. So as you saw in the video, over the late 80s and the early 90s, the NUH had waves of coordinated takeovers in which they would take over vacant HUD buildings, which served a double purpose. The first was to meet the material need of housing people, but the second was to call a serious question into motion in the eyes of the public. Why in a nation when there are vacant government-owned buildings are there still homeless people on the streets? Today, there are somewhere between 8 and 11 million homeless people living in the US. And again, the statistic is likely to rise because of the current conditions of both the pandemic and economic devastation. You can go to the next slide. I live in Atlanta right now, and here in Atlanta, I'm proud to have met with some of the organizers of the local Atlanta Homeless Union. This past July, before I moved here, unhoused leaders set up tents on the lawn of City Hall to demand a meeting with elected officials. And the 4 demands were as follows. 1, permanent housing. 2, healthcare. 3, access to water and sanitation. And finally, a seat at the table. We have a saying here in the movement, you only get what you are organized to take. And that's exactly what Atlanta is doing. They're organizing a mass movement to take what rightfully belongs to them. And I want us all to take a second in Wisconsin to think about if we are actually organized enough to take what we deserve here. And the answer that you'll probably come up with is that we aren't nearly as organized as we can be to take what we fully deserve. We're building towards that, but we're not there yet, but we can be. So you can go to the next slide. At the NUH, we are dedicated to not just winning housing, but ending all forms of exploitation, racism, sexism, and abuse. As we say in our mission statement, we are not just creating a new society, but also the new human being. And one of the things that we recognize at both the PPC and the NUH is that we are about to enter a period of hypocrisy. For some people, those who celebrate Christmas, the holiday season celebrates the life of a revolutionary leader, Jesus Christ, a poor man born homeless because there was no room at the inn for his parents. However, we call this a period of hypocrisy because our current commercialized Christmas season loses sight of the true meaning of Christmas, which was the birth of a leader that went on to challenge empire. So we're shifting the narrative to make it recognize that God chooses the poor and condemns the rich over and over again. We call this the Winter Offensive. And in the Winter Offensive, we worship together, learn together, and take action together. We are demanding a room at the inn, housing, healthcare, and right to fare well. And so the National Union of the Homeless is partnering with the Cairo Center to gather from Thanksgiving to Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday to hear from leaders all around the country organizing and teaching towards building a mass movement to end poverty. You can go to the next slide. For the next 3 months, we'll gather virtually every Sunday at 5 p.m. CST to worship and organize together. There are 5 key dates, though, that I want to lift up, and I'll put in the chat that will invite you to organize with us. The first is December 10th, which is the anniversary of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The second is December 21st, which is the annual National Homeless Memorial Day and condemnation of mass graves of poor, unnamed people. The third is December 25th, which is the birth of Jesus Christ. The fourth is the New Year and the making of resolutions. And finally, January 15th, which is the birthday of Reverend Dr. King. At each of these events, we'll hear from leaders on the ground across the country, the Jesus Christ and the Martin Luther King Jr.'s of this day that are fighting empire in their own communities, organizing the masses and building power to create a movement that cannot be ignored. These will be live streamed on the Cairo Center and Poor People's Campaign Facebook. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. The National Union of the Homeless and its history, along with the history of the 1968 Poor People's Campaign and the revival of the 2018 PPC, are not all separate histories. They are part of a long legacy of the poor and the dispossessed coming together across historic lines of division, race, geography, gender, ethnicity, and so much more, in order to fight, in the words of the NUH leader, Dr. Savina Martin, and organize the least of these to take back this country. And as we continue to learn from our Wisconsin Stories project, everyone on this Zoom call is affected by the current system. In various ways and degrees, yes, and we can't lose sight of that, but we are all impacted by a sick society that puts the needs of a few ahead of the needs of many. The system is not built for us. As the Homeless Union often says, many of us are only one paycheck away from homelessness ourselves. And it doesn't have to be this way. We can build and we can organize towards a different kind of world. We only get what we are organized to take. I literally have it on my wall behind me. It's time for us to organize and take back what's ours. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it on to Femi, who's going to talk a little bit more specifically about how Wisconsin is participating in this national fight on a local level and how everyone here can get involved. Thanks so much, Femi. And you can stop sharing the screen.
Well, thanks.
I'm going to pause us for 1 sec, Femi, before you go.
Okay.
Thank you. Nate, could you please make me an interpreter? And Charito, ya terminó su parte y Leo, yo voy a empezar a interpretar ahora para que usted pueda descansar y luego al final si podemos dar otro turno, Leo, y de ahí ya terminaremos. ¿Está bien? ¿Intérpretes? Ok, muchas gracias, Charito. Y estamos ahí de corazón con usted. Gracias. Ok.
Okay. Yeah, she's been moved to interpreter, so I think we won't be hearing her. So we can, yeah.
Good. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks, Moses. As Moses said many times throughout the powerful presentation, that we only get what we're organized to take, right? We are not far from 1968. In fact, 1968 in many ways seems to be what we're living in 2021. And 2021 is in many ways 1968. We are literally like face to face with basically 1968. We find ourselves with the same issues of our past brothers and sisters. The poor were poor then, and obviously the poor are poor now. The tent cities have scattered across America. And we see many of these issues in California. We see many of these issues in different states throughout the country. But we also see many of these issues in our own very own state. And so we see the visibility of its structures as we drive throughout the cities and throughout the state. We know far too long that as we fight this oppressive system, it is our responsibility to raise the consciousness of the inability to be human. Because that really seems to be the issue, right? That what does it mean to be human? To be human in its most basic form is to love. And we saw that by the first 3 minutes of our time together before this session, where a powerful song was sang about, we shall learn to lean into love. And Archbishop Oscar Romero said, this is the greatest disease of our world today, not knowing how to love. Everyone at their best is hopefully and certainly in this process of being better humans. But what does it look like when humanity fails? Well, within our own very own state, we see that there is this bill being discussed. It is called AB 604 that addresses the unhoused, those living in tent cities across Wisconsin. And it is an attempted legislation that basically seeks to make certain public spaces off limits to camp on and force the unhoused to be in basically designated camping areas throughout Wisconsin. And it does this by two ways. The first way that it does this is by putting a performance type of budget on organizations in order to receive 10 to 15% of an organization of funding to operate this organization. They have to help the unhoused get off of the street and show they have reduced homelessness, which sounds very good. But I mean, even when there are basically no sustainable resources to direct these people to, that is clearly a failure written inside that bill. The second point of this bill is that it criminalizes you, me, us, our community, our state. Basically, they will penalize the unhoused a $500 fee and up to 30 days in jail for not camping in designated public spaces. And so this is a bill that does not address the root cause. And in fact, it rips the Band-Aid off that many people have put on themselves with their best effort, with their best foot forward. And so this bill promotes a continuous cycle of status quo, of continued process of camp cities, and criminalizes in many ways us. That criminalization is in fashion in our state, unfortunately. Criminalization is in fashion in our nation. And this is being at the point where our humanity fails at being better humans. And so the process of being better humans, what does that look like for us as this Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign? What does it mean for us to embrace the process, becoming better humans? There's a chant that I love that has the possibility of being rewritten for any circumstance, any situation. And it basically says, or I basically rewrote it in this way. When the unhoused are under attack, what do? We stand up, fight back. When veterans are under attack, what do? We stand up, fight back. When families are under attack, what do we do as a state? We stand up and fight back. When humans are under attack, what do? We stand up, fight back. When low-wage workers are under attack, what do we do as a state, as a Poor People's Campaign? We actually take action and we stand up and fight back. Ella Baker says this, that when we have rights only as long as we're willing to struggle for them. And that is our responsibility, to struggle and take action together. And so the action that we together are calling each other into is to write your senator to vote down on this bill specifically. And the good news is that we have actually already written the bill and pretty much done the letter to address your senators. And so all you have to do is click on the link, put in your information, but I quickly want to share what the letter basically says as we prepare to share that in the chat. And it says this: Senator, as your constituent, I demand that you vote down AB 604. We must address the fractured systems that cause homelessness, not deepen those inequities through criminalization. I'm a member of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival. We work for policies that lift from the bottom up. This means that real positive change for everyone can only happen by first lifting those directly affected by the many injustices within this nation. We are plagued with systemic racism, poverty, denial of healthcare, ecological devastation, militarism, and a distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism, all of which are interconnected and disproportionately affect poor and low-wage Americans. When we think about the people that this bill plans to criminalize, are they involved in the discussion? In Wisconsin, 4,515 people experience homelessness on any given day as of 2020. Also, as of 2020, it takes 95 hours of work per week at the state and federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour just to afford a 2-bedroom rental home. This bill is an attack on the humanity of the poor and dispossessed. Wisconsinites who are forced into homelessness are often families with children, people struggling with mental health struggles, individuals facing hardships finding work or working full-time for a non-livable wage, and disabled seniors or veterans that served this country. Most importantly, human beings. This is not just one issue. This is the direct result of living in a society that, despite being the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, has chosen and consistently chooses to maintain poverty and homelessness. It is not right to make decisions without the voices of those directly impacted. It is not right to criminalize victims of systemic poverty. It is not right to penalize poverty with a $500 fee. Are we not in a pandemic? Are we not human? It is not right to punish someone with up to 30 days in jail for not being able to access or afford quality healthcare, a home, a living wage, and a job. Being homeless is not a crime. The existence of homelessness, when we have the resources to ensure housing for all, is a crime. The measure in this bill exploitively capitalize on those who are suffering rather than working for the betterment of our communities as a whole. We don't need an expansion of the shelter system, nor the expansion of a system that criminalizes humans. We need an expansion of public, affordable, accessible, safe, clean housing, and true measures that end systems that push poor and low-income folks out of society. To support those most at risk for homelessness, Wisconsin should direct robust funding for public, affordable housing for all and raise the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour. This will do more to minimize homelessness than criminalizing and preying upon those who are already homeless, on the verge of homelessness, and struggling enough as it is to survive. Again, I demand that you vote down AB 604 and ensure fundamental human rights for the people of Wisconsin. Forward together, a member of the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign. And so that's what we're seeking to send out to our senators. Everyone has a part to play in that. And we're all invited to do that part, to struggle together, to move the needle forward in the cause of justice. And so with that, I'm gonna pause for a break. Is that true for the interpreters real quick? Any changes? If not, I will continue to go for sure with the transition into partner organizations. All right, I'm just gonna go continue on. So yeah, thank you all so much for tonight. Before we wrap things up with some information about another action we are taking on Wednesday, we wanted to pass it along to Brittany to lead our partners in talking just about what their organizations are currently doing and how we can support them also. So Brittany, take it away.
Thank you, Femi. So tonight we're going to hear from Peggy from Expo, which is Ex-Incarcerated People Organizing. We will hear from Nate from PSL, and then we'll hear from Bruce in Wausau. So Peggy, you can get us started. We'll do about 2 minutes each.
Awesome. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. Amazing synergy here. So I'm happy to be here. We have 2 things coming up. One is in 2 days, and I'm going to drop it in the chat. Expo is in the process of working with All Voting is Local, the League of Women Voters, Chippewa Valley Votes. Our goal is to get access to the ballot to everyone in county jails across the state. There are 72 counties. There's only 1 county right now that's allowing access to the ballot to the people in their custody. And when I say access, I mean they're making it simple. You don't have to go through a process. You just whatever, bam. So what we would like is for people to join us on Thursday night, get more information, and then commit to working with your county to get voting in the jail going there. Along those same lines, on January 12th, we will be headed to Madison to do an Unlock the Vote Action Day. Currently in the state of Wisconsin, people are not allowed to vote until they have finished their supervision. And so basically what that is taxation without representation. And we would like to end that in the state of Wisconsin. Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan have all ended not allowing people to vote that are on supervision, but Wisconsin, we still do. So we will be, again, going to Madison. I'll have more information, but if you guys could save the date, January 12th, and join us, we would love it. Thank you so much.
All right, Nate.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. I just have a short presentation. Yeah. Okay, so PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, I organize with in Milwaukee. So we have a Milwaukee branch, and let me just start a timer just to make sure. All right, so I'm just gonna cover some stuff. So I guess we've changed some structure. We've made some structural changes to our geez, my cursor disappeared here. Hold on one second. All right, got it. Okay, we've made some structural changes, and we've broken down in, we have few more people, and we've broken down into units, and we're focusing on different areas of Milwaukee. We're discovering and we're researching different needs of the community, and we meet more often and in tighter groups now. So my unit is Unit 1, and we're targeting east side north to Highway 190 and south to Kinnickinnick River, where the mouth goes out. This is most of this map right here. Is the black is our unit, and then the 6, 3, and 4 are the official political districts. This is about 10 to 15 square miles. Some stuff we've done so far, like I said, we're doing investigations. We cover stuff like geography, population, demographics, history, economics, what's going on with homelessness, evictions and stuff. So we each research a different topic, and then we sort of present to the group, and we continue on week after week. We have targeted studies, so we've decided as a group since we've been distributing information about the Milwaukee Tenants Union, we're going to be studying the history of tenants' rights struggles in Milwaukee. This is outreach day, so you can see the picture. We organized outside of it was either a dollar store, I can't remember, it was a store, and we also knocked doors and for MATU. So this picture is from Tenants Union and Milwaukee Area Tenants Union, Milwaukee Autonomous Tenants Union. So that's a mistake. I guess my 2 minutes is up, but yeah, I'll try to hold on. Yeah, so you're welcome to join us for outreach. If you're in PPC, you can, especially for MATU, or get the let out. We have a paper, we published some stuff, anti-imperialist, a lot of anti-imperialist articles, so anti-war stuff. I don't think there's really a big anti-war movement in the United States. It's really hard to find anything critical of any war that ever happens from the United States in our media. So it's a good place to check for adversarial journalism. Let us know if you have something that, let me know if you have something that you might find leftists across the country might find interesting. We organized for police funding. I'll skip that for now. We organized the Cuba Caravan. I don't know, there's just different stuff we do. The Cuba Caravan was it was put on by the Wisconsin Coalition to Normalize Relations with Cuba. So that's like a bigger umbrella group. Peace Action in Wisconsin was involved, but this is just to raise awareness about the US sanctions on Cuba. So if you want to join, you can apply for membership at pslweb.org. And also if you have anything that you want to know about or tell us about, the email address is right here, Milwaukee@pslweb.org. I'll also put it in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Nate. Bruce.
I'm Bruce. I'm from Wausau, and I'm a member of PPC as well as Citizens for Clean Wausau, which is a grassroots environmental group within Wausau. They've been around about 5 years, and they've been advocating for holding the polluters accountable and for recently adopting more policy to include environmental justice. Now, a lot of people don't know, but Wausau is the home to the oldest standing factory of 3M, the 3M company, the oldest one in the world. It's been around about 100 years. And it's within around that neighborhood, which is working class. It's 50% of it is poor, 30 or so percent of it is people of color. And it's the most highly polluted area in the entire region. So Citizens for Clean Wausau is looking at ways of building, they're looking into options for building a campaign, and it looks like we're leaning towards calling that there be no more industrial expansion in Wausau. So the campaign would be to stop industrial expansion. Currently, we're pursuing open records for the finding of a carcinogen in the form of a vapor was actually known for the last 30 years by 3M and the city of Wausau. We're looking at ways to reach out and connect with the workers in these industries as well, while maintaining a relationship with the PPC's Midwest Environmental Justice group. So a lot of good things happening. They've done a lot of good things, and the kind of support we're looking for at this point is we had one email burst. It was very effective, and they were very appreciative for the input of others from around the state to the City Council of Wausau. So those are the kinds of activities right now, the kind of support we would be needing, and there's much more to come. There's a lot of excitement about this. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to all of our partner organizations for sharing. And we're going to close off our meeting. Believe it or not, we have an action happening tomorrow with the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign. We're doing a lot. Our partner organizations are doing a lot. And so I'm going to pass it to Reverend Ari, who's going to talk about that. And then we're going to close things up for tonight. And so Reverend Ari, you can go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk a little bit about an action that we will be taking tomorrow at 11 a.m. Central Time at the Madison office of Senator Ron Johnson. As you may or may not know, the largest investment in people by the U.S. government in a generation is online in Washington, D.C. with a reconciliation package. The Build Back Better BBB legislation is nowhere near what we need to fully address poverty and low wealth people in this nation, and yet we know that it is an important step and will result in a massive investment in the people. The National Poor People's Campaign is calling for nationally coordinated press conferences and rallies at U.S. Senator offices in their states tomorrow, November 10th. State Poor People Campaign will gather across the country to put on various press conferences to make our voices heard and to challenge our senators to invest in the people and hold the line. This is our final shot to make sure all of the life-saving elements and programs are included in the plan. 6 million 3- and 4-year-olds will benefit from universal pre-K. 4 million people get health insurance by expanding Medicaid. Extends child tax credit for millions of parents. 250 million saved by giving government power to negotiate drug prices. 4-week paid family and Medicaid leave. The next few weeks are critical for our movement in this country. There's a timeline coming from Washington, which as a national movement, we need to respond to with a coordinated strategic arc of actions, which will show our power and make a critical final push to hold the line for some of our senators and to call on other senators to not obstruct the will and needs of the people. The House is planning to vote on the BBB and infrastructure plan very soon. Senator Manchin yet again has called into question whether our nation, the richest in the world, can afford to invest in the plan. Currently, a congressional scorecard is being made to look at the economics of it. The BBB Senate vote will come up during the week of November 15th, after senators come back from their home states. So tomorrow we are calling on Senator Ron Johnson to meet our demands. We will gather at 11 a.m. Central Time tomorrow morning outside of Ron Johnson's Madison office, located at 5315 Wall Street, to sing together, hear from directly impacted testifiers, and most importantly, build power in such a way that Ron Johnson cannot ignore our demands. If you are interested in joining, check out our Facebook event, which Moses is putting in the chat right now. I think he already has, or no? Well, we'll be soon. We want to make it clear that the BBB is not our only demand. We are continuing to demand action on voting rights. We are going to keep pushing for dignity and protections for all 11 million undocumented immigrants in the BBB. We need to preserve the climate protections in the legislation. but it's clear it's not enough to address climate change. The BBB is not the solution, but it is an important step in a series of steps in order to invest in the lives and livelihoods of the people, especially the 140 million poor and low-income people in this country. So we invite those of you that can to join us for a Moral Witness Wednesday tomorrow at November 10th. If you have any questions, you can reach out to wisconsin@poorpeoplescampaign.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Reverend Ari. And thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. In the chat, we're going to share both our Getting Involved form and also just information about Wednesday's action and information. Thank you all for your time, and we hope to see you at our next statewide meeting in January. So we'll pass it on to Natalia to close us off.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, particularly Lufemi and Moses for chairing this really good meeting. To our interpreters, to all of you who are here, have shared your evening with us, our discussion leaders, Colleen as our guest speaker, our tech team, our chat leader. Thank you everybody for making this possible. And to close us off on a positive note, we're gonna do our chant that characterizes the Poor People's Campaign and gets to what it is that we do and we want to achieve, right? So we're gonna first say forward together, and you're gonna respond not one step back. And then we're gonna say in Spanish, I'm gonna say juntos pa'lante, and you're gonna say ni un paso atrás. Okay, so we'll do it in English first, forward together, and you'll respond not one step back. We'll do it once, and then I'll say juntos pa'lante, and you'll say ni un paso atrás. One time each, okay? Please come off mute. Please turn your mics on. And here we go. Forward together.
Not one step
back.
Juntos pa'lante.
Ni un paso atrás.
All right, that was really good in both languages. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice
Thank you all.